All right, folks, I want to welcome our guest to the show. It's Nicholas Barker, author and experiencer. Welcome to the show, man.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. I'm glad you're here. So let's get right into it. Let's talk about this paranormal thing. What got you interested in the paranormal and sent you on this path that you've been on for so long now?
Well, when I was a kid, I was actually petrified of a lot of paranormal stuff. It wasn't until much later on when I started actually having experiences of my own that really kind of pushed me into that realm of being interested in things that were spooky or like weird. And, I started kind of, I don't know, I guess I became a folk teller of sorts because I started looking at a lot of the Appalachian Mountain spooky history, especially like Brown Mountain Lights, things like that. And it just kind of sucked me in, man. I mean, I started writing shortly after that. As far as like poetry goes, I got really into Edgar Allan Poe, of course, dark, spooky stuff. And then I started writing my first novel when I was probably about 19, 20. And it just kind of seemed natural just to kind of go into that sort of horror genre or like with the spooky stuff based on kind of what I've experienced and what I've seen over my life as I've grown up. So
Well, let's talk about some of those personal experiences. When did your experiences start and what kind of experiences were you having?
well, when I was a kid, it used to be kind of just weird things, just kind of you just kind of sense that you're not alone. A lot of times, most of my experiences would mainly happen when I was alone. Most of the time, it would happen sort of in the late evenings or at night, and it would just it's kind of started as stuff like weird sounds that you sort of explain away, but you're really not sure exactly what it is. And then eventually, it gets to the point that it's like, okay, that's something you can't just refuse. Eventually it culminated into I used to have a room, or I used to sleep in a room that was just like it had an open doorway. It didn't have a small enough doorway to have a door on it. And I would hear just crazy stuff at night. And some of it was kind of old house settling noises and stuff like that. But then that's when the stairs started. And I remember that fondly. I was probably, gosh, I was probably like close to about 14 or 15, I want to say. Maybe a little bit after that. That's when I started hearing distinct footsteps that would start from the bottom of my stairs at the end of the hallway from where I stay, would walk slowly down the hallway and would round the corner, and you would stop hearing the footsteps at the foot of my bed. And it used to really freak me out, man. It really did. And there was a couple of nights that I would hear it and I just couldn't go to sleep. But eventually, I guess I got kind of just used to it because it started happening enough to where it was like, well, it's just that again. But nothing escalated as far as that went until a little bit later on when I was actually 16 or 17. And this is where my first real experience starts. And it's a lot of people, I tell them the story, but a lot of people I think don't believe it, but I believe it because I was there. But have you ever heard of Beaucatcher Mountain in Asheville?
I have not. I'm not familiar with it.
There is a mountain in Asheville. It's called Beaucatcher Mountain, and supposedly there was a mansion up there that the I'd always heard, as far as legend or folklore, was that there was a rich couple that lived up there, which I have corroborated. There was a rich family that lived up there in the 1930s, I think. They had a housekeeper and a small daughter, and the housekeeper was cooking some food, and she accidentally set the house on fire. And the young daughter was directly above her, and she burned to death in the blaze. And supposedly, this housekeeper survived it and was blamed, she felt, by the family. So she ran out to the little bridge that crossed the space in between the drive and into the mansion, and she hung herself on the bridge. So there is a small bridge. If you go up Beaucatcher Mountain to the top, you can go underneath the bridge. You could walk up to the bridge, but they've got a lot of fences everywhere now. But me and a bunch of friends went up there one night, and we decided we were going to go ghost hunting up there. And we weren't like being disrespectful or anything, I don't think, but I took some pictures and stuff like that because the legend is if you take a picture underneath the bridge, you can see the noose hanging from the bridge. So I got done with that, and we all decided to go home, and it was fun. my last friend I had to drop off in Marion, North Carolina. So I drove from Marion all the way back to Morganton, which is a little bit of a drive. Got back home, didn't think anything of it. Went in, started playing a video game or something on my computer. I was kind of a night owl back then, and then I started hearing these strange sort of like noises, but it wasn't like a knocking or anything. It just sounded like something sort of wiggling around, I guess. And I looked over at my bed, and I didn't really hear any or see anything necessarily weird, but I was tired, so I was like, well, I'm just going to go to bed. I was laying there in the bed. No sooner than I had flipped off the lights, I felt two hands grabbing the mattress on each side of me, and they started pulling down on the sides of the mattress as if somebody was laying under there pulling each side down. And it was freaky enough. I flipped on the light and jumped out of bed and just kind of looked. And I didn't see anything, but I could hear it. I could hear like the mattress like crinkling and stuff. It was a really odd sound. But after that, I just kind of was like, what the hell, sort of thing. And as soon as I did, it was like something jumped on top of the bed. And the impressions of where it was standing was not like feet or claws, it was like hooves. But they were weird looking hooves. They weren't like a cow or a deer. They were just kind of elongated, sort of weird. I don't know how to describe it, but it did. And I in my mind, I heard like a roar or something. But my parents slept just across the hall from me, and they didn't hear anything. But it jumped down off the bed, ran around the corner, and ran downstairs, and I heard the door slam so hard that I really thought that it had broken the glass on the door. So I went down there and looked, and nothing was wrong with the door. But I walked into my parents' room. I was sure that they had heard it because, I mean, it was loud, and they didn't even rouse out of bed. They were just snoring away, just never heard a thing. And it really kind of freaked me out at that point. And I kind of took it as a sign to stop ghost hunting altogether. So I took a long, long break from that. But that was really kind of the first experience that sort of opened me up into a whole bunch of different stuff. And after that, it was like, I could just sense something was wrong. Whenever something was around, before the noises even started, I could just kind of feel it. You know what I mean? Later on, shortly after that, I want to say probably about like 4 or 5 months after that, my sister was supposed to be out of the house, and she was supposed to be gone to a party, be back late. Well, I'm up till 2 in the morning, and 2 in the morning, you hear somebody rattling the doorknob. You kind of think, okay, well, it's somebody I know coming in the house. So I go down to the bottom of the steps, and I'm standing there, and I didn't even flip on the downstairs light. It was pitch black. And I called for my sister a couple times because I was sure that I heard her come in the house. And there was nothing there, like no sounds, no lights, no nothing. So I just kind of just started to turn around, and I put one foot back on the step, and I started back up it. And from behind me, I heard what sounded like my sister's voice whisper my name. And it was over my right shoulder, off in the darkness. And I whirled around real quick, thinking, okay, maybe she was there, but there was nobody there. I flipped on the light. I looked all downstairs. There was no one in that house besides me and my parents upstairs. And so I flipped all the lights off, and I hauled, butt up the stairs. And I got back in my room, and I kind of sat there for a minute. I was kind of expecting to see something come around the corner, but it never did. But those were really kind of the first two experiences that I had that was really distinct. Beyond that, of course, I would experience more of the footsteps walking up the stairs and down the hall. A lot of like, I would think I would see stuff, sort of, not out of the corner of my eye, but like you turn, you look, and you see something that's there. And then you just kind of take a second look, or maybe you focus in a little bit, and then you don't see anything at that point. So that's kind of the realm it got into. But eventually, a lot of it had stopped when I was living at my parents' house. Now, once I moved out, I never really had too many instances until I started driving a truck over the road. The over the road stuff, now that got a little bit escalated. That got to the point that there were some things that I wasn't sure what to make of it, but One of the more subtle things, which I know a lot of truckers experience, me and my partner, because I was over the road with somebody else, so I had somebody with me the whole time. Me and my partner, on the rare occasion, we were actually bedded down for the night, waiting to drop off a load. And we're in like a truck stop, but we're kind of secluded in the truck stop. There's nothing around us. Nobody's there in that section. There's just nothing but a row of trees behind us. So I did a final check when I shut down the truck, made sure all of the brakes and everything were good and I wasn't leaking anything. And there was nobody out there. I mean, it was silent, absolutely silent. So I went to bed. Well, it was probably about 2:30, maybe 3 o'clock in the morning. And my partner wakes me up saying, "Hey man, did you hear that?" And I was like, "What are you talking about?" And he was like, "There's somebody at our door." And I was like, okay, that's kind of wild, but I didn't hear anybody. So I got up out of my cot and I kind of just looked around and I didn't see anybody out the window and everything. So I just kind of thought, well, maybe it's just a wind or something catching the side of the truck. So I just laid back down. Well, sure enough, not even 5 minutes, I heard what sounded like somebody was beating on the space in between the front of the trailer and the back of the cab. Like somebody was just standing there, just wailing on it. Well, I don't know with what. It didn't sound metallic. It sounded flat, like they were using a piece of wood or their hand or something. So I got up. I was not going out there. I didn't have a gun at the time. So I did the next best thing. I rolled down the window and I stuck my head through the window and I looked around. And I mean, I don't know if you've ever been a truck or not, but a regular just over the road cab, you can look out the window and kind of see down the side of the truck. And most of the time in a lit area, you can kind of see who's there. But there was nobody around, man. It was so quiet out there that you could hear a pin drop, but there was nobody there. So I went back, got in the bed, made sure the doors were locked, pulled the sun blockers back over the window. And as soon as I laid back down, it was, you heard it a couple more times and it just kind of stopped. But that was freaky. And that was the weirdest thing I'd ever heard because it sounded just like somebody was just out there just beating on my truck for no reason. But then comes probably the craziest experience I've had. Now, I'm not saying this is overtly paranormal because I still haven't been able to process it to this day. And this was several years ago. But the most wild experience I had is my partner had chosen a spot where we could pull off. Now, I can tell you right now, this was in New Mexico. It was outside of Albuquerque, New Mexico on I-40. And it was a weird, weird night because there had been a couple of dust storms it looked like, and the sky was kind of like a beigeish sort of red, kind of. So it came late in the evening. He pulled over. I'm asleep. I didn't know where he pulled over at all. So when I got up, he was telling me that he had pulled over and it was not like a rest stop. And I said, "Well, where'd you pull over at?" And he's like, "Well, I'm out of hours, so I just pulled over wherever I could find." So I climb up in the cab and I looked around and man, there's just nothing there. It's just desert. And you could see the ramp behind us where he had come up, but you couldn't really see much else. And I looked out the front of the window and there's a truck and they're going real slow and there's lights shining out of the side of the truck. And I asked him, so what's that about? And he was saying the two guys had approached him and asked him if he had seen a pair of glasses that had fallen on the ground. He said, "No, I haven't seen it." Well, the thing that spooked me out was just the hill up to the right a little bit. There was a truck that looked like it had been caught on fire, like it was burnt out. And I don't know how long that truck had been there, but it didn't look like it was there for that long, but it was just middle of nowhere. So I had to do my pre-check. I didn't really want to do my pre-check because I don't know who's out there. So I get out of the truck and I start doing my pre-check. And, it's one of those kind of like, you ever seen Ghost of Mr. Chicken? It's kind of like that. You take two steps and you turn around and look behind you. So I checked all of my stuff as best I could. And I heard like a crunching sort of sound. So I just climbed back up in the truck. I was like, "There's somebody else out here. I know there is," because I could feel like somebody was watching me the whole time. But I didn't think anything of it. It was my turn to start driving. So I gave myself my little 30-minute period and everything. And that truck had, I don't know if it had turned around and come back or if it had gotten on to an auxiliary road and come back, but they were back again. They were looking. So I didn't think anything of it. Well, I got ready. I, pulled off my parking brake and set the air brakes and made sure they were good and then popped the air brakes off and I was taking off. And I can tell you that the freakiest part of it is seeing a big rig go up over a hill, disappear completely out of sight. You cross the hill not even a minute afterward, and that truck is nowhere to be found. Nowhere. I start down that other side of the ramp, and it's like the ramp just wasn't even there. I had to jump a ditch to get back onto the interstate, and I don't even know why that was there, but it was. It was marked as a ramp. That was the freakiest experience that I've ever had because the main thing is I don't even know if to this day if that was a real truck or not, or if those guys were real, or if any of that was real, really. But it was that was probably the freakiest experience that I have ever had as far as paranormal goes. But yeah.
I want to go back to some of the things that were happening in the home.
Yeah.
Earlier on, did you attribute it to the ghost hunting that you did and maybe disturbing something under the bridge that was related to this legend? Or do you think the house that you were in was haunted? Or do you think it was just more about an energy vibe and you being more intuitive and open to those kind of experiences? Or maybe it was a combination of all of those?
Well, in some ways, looking back on it, I would say it was a combination. But at the time, my parents, I was raised to be a very staunch analytical person. Ghosts don't exist, demons don't exist. That's all figments of your imagination. So when I was younger, when I would experience things or I would hear things, I would just kind of, like I said, I would chalk it up to something. But sometimes there was a weird energy in the house. To expound upon that, which I don't know if it's really paranormal or not because it never culminated in anything. But I can remember many summer breaks when my parents were at work and I was the only one home. And I mean, you're just sitting in a room. You're not doing anything. You're not saying anything to anybody. You're not even watching a movie that could be creepy. You're just kind of hanging out. And then all of a sudden, it's like the whole room just feels like I don't belong here. There's somebody in the room that's here, and maybe they're telling me, hey, get lost, like leave. And it was just such a feeling that it would just, you put it off in the back of your head, like, okay, whatever. I'm just kind of freaking myself out because I'm the only one in the house. But then eventually it gets to the point to where it's like, okay, if I don't leave now, something is going to get me. And it would be to the point that I would literally walk out of the house, turn around, say, I'm leaving. I would throw my keys to the house back into the house, and then I would just shut the door and lock it. And I would sit outside the rest of the time. And it could be, it could be 95, 100 degrees in the middle of July. And I'm just sitting out there, just waiting for somebody to come home because I'm not going back in there, you know? So I think it was a combination of a lot of things. As far as the specific event of the thing, whatever it was that followed me home that night, as far as I know, I don't necessarily believe it was a demon because, demons often, they infest places. They don't just come, give you a warning and then vanish, In my experience and the things that I've done afterward, it's more of like they come to stay, especially if they like you. So I think it was just maybe like a culmination of all the energies of whatever was in that place. Maybe because I was the one that might have been more sensitive to it than other people or whatever, that it chose me. And of course, the funny part of it is I was the one that organized the whole thing. So I'm assuming it kind of just figured out, okay, he's the schmuck that got this started. So let's, but yeah, it was to the point that I didn't ghost hunt in that capacity for a long time. I mean, of course I do now to some extent with me and my wife, but it's nothing like taking a group of people or anything. We try to be minimal as much as possible, but now, did that influence some things that happened later, possibly in the house? But I don't know because that was such an escalation point that if you look at the other stuff that happened whenever I was there, it was a little bit more like there could have been something there. There could have been just a spirit or something wander in. It freaks you out. It stands there, maybe tries to interact with you, and then you just kind of you don't know what to do with it. So you just kind of okay, I'm just going to leave now. But eventually, I will say that it did get to the point in that house to where I could walk into a random room, and it felt almost like you're walking in on two people having an argument. Like, okay, I shouldn't be here. I don't need to be here, and I'm just going to leave. My dad, I've always told my parents. I told them, me and my sister both told them from a young age, hey, this house is haunted. Like, you guys need to figure this out. We need to do something about it. And my dad laughs it off and says, "Oh, that doesn't exist. That's not a thing. That you've been watching too many horror movies. You need to relax." But I will say the one justice that I kind of got out of it, my 21st birthday, I was leaving the house. Forgot a hat and I had to go back in to go get it. And my dad's sitting downstairs folding some clothes. And I walk in and I said, "Hey, Dad, I forgot my hat." And he said, "Yeah, the oddest thing just happened." I said, "What?" And he said, "All the doors in the house just closed all at once by themselves." And I just kind of looked at him and said, "Well, I guess it was just a draft, huh, Dad?" But I mean, what am I to say, But it's kind of calmed down since me and my sister moved out. I can say that because my parents don't really, I mean, even if they would say anything, they don't really report anything. But sometimes if I go in that house alone and I kind of walk upstairs or something, sometimes you walk into a room, you still get that feeling like, hey, I probably shouldn't be here. I walked in on something I shouldn't see. So
Well, you obviously took a little break from the ghost hunting back then, but
yeah.
as you got into this as an older age, or what has happened since then? What have you gotten into as far as ghost hunting and some of the paranormal stuff that you've been into as an adult?
Well, honestly, it got to the point that because of the interest that I had, I stopped really being afraid of a lot of things like that. I guess I started really sorting out kind of how I felt in those moments. And I started realizing that it may not be anything that's threatening. It could just be, my body's way of saying, like, hey, there's something else here with you. You are not alone, do what you will with that. But I never, unlike before, I don't really see it anymore as like you need to leave. It's more of like, okay, that's pretty crazy when that happens. So, I won't necessarily give any details, but I've helped a few people to cleanse their homes and remove spirits and stuff like that. We've done it a few times, but it could be ranging from a simple haunting that's just like some real crazy stuff kind of happens every once in a while. You clear that stuff out, you even out the energy of the home, and then you move on, and then you know more. More recently, I would say it, you walk into a home and it's just absolutely oppressive. And you've got something in there that is just, it's like it wants you dead. And I'm not really trying to say that to be hyperbolizing it. I'm not really wanting to go sort of dramatic with it. But that's kind of the sense you get. It's just a real, just negative feeling. And so, now I've gotten into the field of, not just investigating it from a scientific standpoint, trying to explain things away, but more realizing that some of the things that you just feel and you can't explain, that, some of that stuff just needs to be pushed out of the space. And of course, given what I've gotten into later on, cleansing with sage and doing things like that, trying to remove the negativity of a space is kind of the best thing to do at those points. But as far as a lot of other things, I mean, I guess the more shocking thing is I've had an incident which something tried to possess my wife, and we had to get rid of the thing that it was attached to. And you see something like that, it's almost like you just stop being afraid of it at that point. Because I mean, if you can see somebody get possessed and know what to do to kind of stop it or prevent it from happening or eliminate the problem, you kind of just don't really feel like you're really in danger anymore, I guess, in a lot of ways. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not naive enough to think that everything out there is just hunky dory and I can solve the problem. But, nine times out of 10, you're not going to get anything super crazy or really, really, really dark unless it's been able to kind of linger in a place for a really long time without somebody being there. And it's usually abandoned places that have that. So, yeah.
Have you had any other things like I do a lot of Bigfoot stuff, right? I have a lot of
Yeah.
folks that have Bigfoot encounters, cryptid encounters, and so many times, even with ghost stuff, and I've had it in my own life, different
Yeah.
experiences come with different things. And I used to say, everybody who has these experiences, oh, yeah, I've had a UFO experience. Oh, I've seen a cryptid. Oh, I've had ghost issues and things like that going on. I used to say, well, maybe that person's kind of full of shit because they're having all of this stuff, right? Most of
Yeah.
us never have any of those experiences one time in our life.
Yeah.
And for somebody to have multiple experiences, and then the more I did the show and the more I talked about my own experiences, I'm like, well, I'm kind of that guy because I
Yeah.
have had all these multiple experiences, right?
Yeah.
Some of them are unverifiable. I don't know if I've had an experience with Bigfoot. I think I might have, but I'm not sure. I know I've seen a UFO. So you've had these experiences with demons and, possible paranormal things with ghosts and things like that. What about UFOs? Have you had anything, seen UFOs or any experiences like that you can share with us?
Well, I did have one small incident that, like I said, it's a small thing. It's nothing as crazy as like they fly down and abduct a cow in front of me or anything. But I did have an incident when I was once again in New Mexico of all places. Um, I was right off of I-40 and I was driving a truck and I happened to look over and, out there when you're in the middle of nowhere in New Mexico, you tend to see a lot of scrub brush, but then out of the scrub brush, you'll see fences and, pastures kind of pop up in places. Well, it was probably late summer, I would say. Happen to look over and I see this orb, like just a silver orb. Now I know I sent you the video clips. I don't know if you had time to look at that or not, but in the video clip, what pisses me off about that is I tried so hard to try to capture that while I was driving, and it was almost impossible with the stuff that was on the windshield and all that. I just didn't get a good video of it. But at first, I kind of thought it was one of those like a rain detector. I don't know if you've ever seen that. Some places out west, they'll have this like big, huge, like metal scoop looking thing. And if you're coming at it from a certain direction, it looks like a perfect sphere, but it's not. And all it does is it kind of detects if there's going to be rainfall in that area. Well, this thing, the closer I got to it, the more perfectly round it was, to the point that you couldn't see any seams on it. And I know that I wasn't super close to it, but it's almost like which I never believed anybody whenever they would say, "Oh, I saw this," and you're like, "Well, how could you? You were far away, or this was in the way, or whatever." And they always say, "Well, I don't know. That's the thing I can't explain. I'm standing here looking at it now, and there's no way I could have seen it, but I just saw it. Like I just know I did." And I wouldn't say it was like a strictly out of body experience, but when you kind of focus on it, it's like you just know. It's like there's something about seeing stuff like that that you just kind of know, okay, that's not normal. So the closer I got, I expected to see a wire hanging off of it. I expected to see a pole that it was sitting on. But as I passed by, there was nothing. There was nothing there. It's just hanging in the air. It's not moving. It's literally just hanging there. And it was enough contrast between the background of the sky and the foreground in between me and the poles and everything else that it at that point, once you get close enough, you just kind of look at it and you're like, okay, there's no way that could be there. It's like somebody just photoshopped a silver ball in the middle of the sky and you can't explain how it got there. Since that time, I have seen I've seen streaks in the sky that I can't explain. I've seen what looks like a plane at first. It's got blinking lights and stuff, but then it just turns at an odd angle and just disappears, you know? So I've seen stuff like that. Have I been abducted or anything? Probably not. I mean, who's to say? Because most of the time when you're abducted, you don't find out unless you see some sort of physical evidence, and then you decide to investigate it. And a lot of times you do regressive therapy, and then there it is. I don't really think I've been abducted. But at the same time, I don't know. I really couldn't say. But I would like for them just to stay where they are in the sky, so I don't have to deal with that. But that's pretty much as far as I've seen. Now, as far as a Bigfoot experience goes, I'm like you. I can't definitively say that I have seen Bigfoot, but I have had one incident that I was around for, which I'm pretty sure was a bear, but it's kind of a weird sort of situation. I was at a friend's house up in Marion, and I was just standing on his porch, and he's got a bunch of woods, like I don't know, probably like 4 or 5 yards away from his house, and you just start seeing the trees moving, and you're like, what in the world? And you think maybe it's just something's moving the saplings, like something like a bear or something is moving through there. But then it kind of, you hear this weird, like, I don't know how to describe it. It wasn't like a yell. It was like a moaning sort of noise, but it was like high pitched, like an animal sort of, like a, like that. It wasn't loud. And then all of a sudden you see a tree fall. And then you see another tree start jiggling around a bunch. But then nothing ever comes out of the woods. You expect if it's that close to the house, if a bear is there, he's going to wander out, check it out the area, see if there's any trash, but nothing ever comes out of the woods. That kind of stuck with me as possibly, but I would love to, I'm not a big fan of Bigfoot, but I don't think he's not real. I don't necessarily say that he is or is not. But I would love to see a Bigfoot. That would be, if I could see a Bigfoot at some point in my life, that would be the pinnacle of my life, I would say. Because I've always been fascinated by Bigfoot. I've always been fascinated by the lore. I don't necessarily subscribe to a lot of people going out there and just screaming off in the woods and, hearing noise and say, oh, there he is, but if I ever saw a Bigfoot, I think it would be really cool. Yeah.
Be careful what you ask for. Hopefully it'll be like from 50 yards away and you're driving like 60 miles an hour in a car. That's about the only way I want to see one for sure.
Oh,
so
yeah.
Let's talk about this author business that you got into writing books. So tell us how that came about. How did that progress into your life? And tell us about your first book and what you got going on now.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I first started writing, like I said, I started out with poetry. One of the things that I always liked is I used to like Edgar Allan Poe a lot. I hit a bit of an unfortunate patch in my life. One of my close uncles, he passed away. And so I spent probably a good 6 years in like a really, really just deep depression. And through that, the one thing that kept me from doing anything crazy or if things got too much, I would just sit down and write something. And eventually it got to the point by the time I was probably 19, I had book after book after book just filled with poetry, Um, I won several poetry contests that I didn't even know I entered because one of my teachers had gotten a hold of my poetry and sent it in for me. So I thought that was pretty cool, But I just continued on with that path until one day I kind of thought about it and I was like, well, being a poet's really cool, but I got other stories to tell. And at the time, I was naive enough to think, well, poetry's not gonna be something that I can get into that I can make into a career. Novels, people make careers out of that, and that would be cool. It'd be cool to have a writing career. So I tried my hand at writing a book. It was awful. It was the worst thing I've probably ever experienced in my life. It was a lot harder work than I thought it was. So I got into it 2013. I released the first rendition, I guess you could say, of my first novel, which is Inhumanity. It was okay. I'll tell you right now, I wasn't happy with it. Why I released it, I don't know. But, I was just kind of felt rushed to get something out there, I guess. So it was such a bad experience that it caused me to not want to write anything for years after that. But then it's like after I got back from being over the road and driving a truck, I don't know, something just clicked, and I was like, I got to fix that story. Like I don't know why, but I got to fix it. So um, February of 2020, when COVID hits and everything starts locking down, I just kind of took the time. I said, you know what? Let me just finish this book. Let me get it fixed. Let me finish it. So I went back, rewrote a bunch. Um, I always had sort of like this idea of a character who is proper, but not your typical person that you would think of to deal with something paranormal. And I thought that was pretty cool. I thought it was a pretty good idea. Um, but I didn't really know how to frame it 100%. So I just kind of went off of what I knew. So I looked around for a while. I kind of saw some different ideas, and eventually I settled on Hillsborough, North Carolina, just because it was such a weird place back in the 1800s, and I knew I wanted it set in the 1800s. The main reason that I wanted it set in the 1800s was because the original idea was fueled by a movie that I saw called The Woman in Black. The movie was pretty good. It wasn't a blockbuster hit as far as I remember, but it was just an interesting concept, I thought, because for so long people have kind of looked away from the 1800s as being something where you have a lot of real spooky stuff going on. So I kind of wanted to take that idea and then move it over into America, make it American, make it something that, when people read it, they can say, oh yeah, that's classic American horror tale sort of. So I kind of just thought about, well, if I'm going to have some sort of dandy guy, he can't be from the South, because in 1850, there's nobody who's dandy around here. You got to have somebody from up north. So I wrote about it as a guy who basically he gets an inheritance from his aunt. He comes down to liquidate the property so he can sell it off and get a profit, go back to New York, and just be fine. And he just kind of dismisses the whole thing. Like, okay, I'm just going to come down here. I'm going to tend to business. I'll go back in 2 weeks. It'll be a nice vacation. But then he finds out that the whole place is actually very haunted, infested with a demon, actually. And then he's got to figure out, well, what do I do now? So that was kind of my point that I wanted to kind of get across was, the whole sticking in there and fighting it out with something you don't understand and seeing kind of where the story could take you and where it could turn. So the other premise was isolation, because to me, the scariest stories always happen when you're alone. And that's something that, out of all the experiences I've had in my life, when I've been with people, I can say, okay, that's cool. But when you're alone, it just sticks with you. Like, you never forget that kind of stuff. So that is what really spurred me to write it. And then later on, when I fixed it, I had to add more of a dynamic sort of story and more underlying tone that was much better, that was much more involved with the characters and stuff. And of course, there's love interests in the book and things like that. So, I had to really kind of flesh that out, and that's what really spurred me to kind of take a look at it again, fix it in 2020. I got it finished, got it published. Since then, I've had some success with it, but of course, as I'm a starting out writer, so you got to start somewhere. But um, it's a good book. I thought that I was going to get a lot of criticism for it, um, just because it's the first time writing. I figure there's plenty of people out there who are going to tell me like, "Hey, you could have done this better. Or this could have been better. Maybe you should fix this." But honestly, since I released that book, I have not heard one criticism, not one. I've actually gone to friends and family, and I've told them like, please tell me something wrong with this book. Like, tell me something I can fix about it. It's even been to the point that I've paid people to give me a review, and I've had nothing but 4-star reviews from everybody that I've talked to. Um, I've got people that even though I don't really personally know them, they know friends of friends, and I'm hearing all the time like, when are you going to do the second book? Like, holy crap, you got to get that done. So I just, I kind of felt like, well, I've got to hit, something. So as far as I know, the book is good. Like, I like it. I love the story of it. I think it's a story that I would be proud to write. And that's all that matters to me is if I like it, I'm sure a lot of people out there would like it. So, if you want to check it out, it's on Amazon. Just search for Inhumanity by Nicholas Barker on Amazon. And It'll come right up. It's paperback, and I got a hard copy that you can order. The hard copy books are, well, paperback, but you get what I'm saying. Like, they're a hard physical copy. It takes a little bit for them to come in, but when they do, you'll like it. It's a good book. So,
is the second book that you're working on, is it something completely different, or is it a continuation of Inhumanity?
well, it is a continuation of Inhumanity. It's almost a direct continuation. I don't really like that whole idea of going and writing a book and then like, whoa, well, it's been like 6 years since I wrote that book. Let me do a prequel about this. I don't like that stuff. So I did a direct continuation just because the way that I ended the first one, I've had a lot of people say, what the hell? Like, why did you do it that way? You know what I mean? So I just felt like, well, I can't be that mean of a person. I've got to just give them a direct line into the next story. So the next book that I'm trying to get finished, which it basically is finished, I've just got a little bit more to do on it. And I've got to get an agent and a publisher, or a publisher, however that goes. But it is called Faces of Inhumanity, and it is a continuation of the same characters, but much more in depth into the world that I've kind of tried to create out of the 1800s. It's not like, neither of the books are super historical, but I tried to be as close as I could, so they seemed pretty realistic. But the next book is set in New York, and it's I don't know, without giving away too much details, it's a good one, I think. It's just a little bit, it's got a little bit of a different dynamic, because I've got more to play off of. I've got more characters to sort of play around with. So,
Well, everybody go over and check out Inhumanity. I'll have the links to it in the show notes. You guys go out and pick up a copy. Nicholas, thanks so much for coming on the show and sharing your experiences, man. I had a blast talking to you.
yes, sir, no problem. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.